call the school board policy committee to order. And the first item is to do the pledge of allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Second item is approval of the February 18th, 2021 minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Anybody have any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Policies for first reading. Policy CA, administrative goals. There are no changes in this policy. Policy CH, policy implementation. There are no changes to this policy. Policy CHA, development of regulations. No changes. Policy CBE, superintendent's development opportunities. Relettering, it will now be CBG. Policy JGD, suspensions and expulsions. Relettering with revisions, it will now be JICD. So that's the only one that has changes.
Yes, and there are significant changes to this policy. And this is your first reading, so I know it'll take you a little while to read through all of these changes and digest them. I have included for you the revised statute as well as the education rule that's reflected in this policy. But the big changes will be to the way that we administer discipline, what we can administer discipline for, the time frame, and actually a big change to the discipline committee. The new law is written so that students cannot be suspended for more than 10 consecutive days, and those 10 days are not appealable. And they can only be suspended for those 10 days for behavior that is detrimental to the safety, well-being of the school, or for repeated willful misconduct. So it's going to be there will be no more gross misconduct hearings that you've had. And the role of the board in the new law is if someone is suspended for 10 days for weapon, violence, or drugs, and the board extends the suspension through the superintendent to up to 20 days, then the board would be the appeal body. So the hearing that the discipline committee usually has is actually going to be held by the superintendent. So the discipline committee's role as a representative of the board would be to hear appeals. You had one last year in closed session, we had one appeal. That would be the role of the board with the new law. And there has to be a progression of discipline. That used to be in the law for special education students only. It is now applicable to all students. So it's really the intention of those that authored the law is to keep kids in school. And so it's very restrictive as far as what the school can do. I would encourage you to take time to read through the policy and the changes. You have two copies, one with the track changes and one final copy. And then the law, which is House Bill 677, you'll see as you read through it, anything that has a line through it was, they struck that. Anything in italics and bolded is what has been added. So words like consecutive school days and limiting what you can apply discipline for. Those are the things that you should pay attention to when reading that. And then
Has this law gone into effect?
it goes into effect July 1. So, which is why the policy is coming to you now. So we need to get it through first reading, second reading, and then to the board for their first and second readings as well, which puts us right up to that June meeting so that we can get it into effect for July 1. Most of the changes, we'll have to do a lot of internal changes on our processes, but those are not board approved. They're processes that we can control. So the policy implementation is what we'll need from you. So I suspect that next month, when we look at this for second reading, you'll have more questions. We did try to get some sample policies. They haven't been written yet. So we really looked at what our policy was, what the law said. We had some changes suggested from Drummond and Woodson. Thank you to Nate. So we did incorporate those things into the new policy, and hopefully it will make sense to you upon read.
Any questions, gentlemen?
Question.
Yes, Bob?
So this law has already been passed and signed by the governor? It's not-
It has.
it's not even signed,
Yes, it has,
okay.
yes.
When was that?
It was March 5th, 2020,
Yeah.
to go, the governor signed it on 6/3. And it will go into effect July 1. One of the things that we've asked the School Boards Association to help us with is the turnaround time when they publish new laws, for us to get them into effect, because it's not just as easy as saying, oh, this is a new law and we have to do things this way now. There really is this is a huge change in our practices. So we've asked that they can take that into consideration when giving tight timelines for implementation.
Well, they gave a year here, so.
Yeah, this came to us after the governor signed it. The School Boards Association published it to us, I believe, in October. And usually we like to try to get a sample policy from them so that we can base, all of our policies are really based on the NHSBA sample policies.
Yeah.
They hope to get a sample policy out by June of this year, which really just doesn't help us at all. So we let them know that that really doesn't help us, and that a 6-month lead time is really what we would need from them in the future.
Good suggestion. Is that all, Bob?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Now we have policy.
We have another question.
Oh, yes, okay, Karen.
What was the House bill number?
You have a copy of it
6
in
and
your
7.
on the drive, but it is House Bill 677 FNA. So it was a 677 fiscal note A. And it was sponsored by Representative Myler, Representative Martin, Representative Lay, and Cornell.
Thank you.
Any other questions on second reading of policies for first reading?
Yeah, so question. This new policy about discipline, does this, I'm just beginning to kind of get my way through it, getting through the minutia. Does this make it more difficult, or is it more streamlining?
Well, it takes steps out of the process, because you can't, there's not as many things that you can actually suspend a student for. So what it does is it causes more in-school suspension, more intervention plans.
Okay.
So it just takes out a process that we had where students could be suspended for gross misconduct, and they would have to come to the board, and the board would make a decision whether or not they could return to school or when they could return to school. Sometimes the discipline committee extends them if it's a second offense. Sometimes they say, oh, you need to go to the remote option, but that power is off the table.
Okay.
That is no longer an option. The only option is for all students to be in school.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. Karen?
So does that mean that the discipline committee will probably be disbanded since appeals are to the full board?
The board can designate, there is a part of the law where it says the board can designate a committee to hear appeals.
Oh.
So instead of coming to non-public session at the end of a regular board meeting, as the student did last year, they could then go to the discipline committee.
Oh, okay.
But as we had one last year, I don't know if there was any the previous year, there won't be very many, because that can only happen after a student's been suspended for more than 10 consecutive days. And for that to happen, there has to be a weapon or a threat against the school.
Okay. And then one more question. Will handbooks need to be updated?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And several other policies as well, but this is the big one.
Okay. And then student handbooks.
Yes.
Question.
Yes.
How's that going to affect, so basically if we're reducing the out-of-school suspensions ability to do that, it's going to increase our in-school suspensions. we're gonna have to relook at resources needed, obviously, for
Yes,
those cases.
yes.
Is
And we're
that,
already starting to look at that. We actually have a meeting set up on Monday with the high school to talk about what this new law looks like for them and what things will have to change there, what processes will need to change. So regardless of, what we decide on for policy, the law supersedes any policy, so we need to make sure that our processes are following the law.
So at that point, I imagine the school district will have to look at more of a restorative justice model in much more detail.
Right, the intervention process will be that. It's that, I think that is, that's the intervention.
A lot of work for everybody. Hopefully it'll make it better for the kids. All right, on to policies for second reading. Policy BJ, School Board Legislative Program, formerly BI. Were there any changes in this? Did anybody,
Just lettering.
just lettering? Policy BK, School Board Membership, formerly BJ, and BKA, Liaison with School Board Associations, formerly BJA. So these are all just re-lettered. Anybody have any questions or additions, or would have a motion to move it to the full board?
I'll make the motion to move the policies for second reading as listed to the full board.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? We're on to, yes?
I believe we have to move the policies for first reading to the full board for first reading.
Yes.
So I make that motion.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Everything's moved out. We have public comments. I don't think we have any public here. Seeing none, there's other.
I think we, after our last full school board meeting, I think we need to pull policy BBBD back onto our schedule so we can relook at it as it addresses removal of school board members. And it quotes the city council's rule on that, given the city council's legal statement for school board meeting.
Was that policy number, letter again?
BBBD, I believe.
The BBB? The new letter? So can we put that on our agenda for the next,
Sure. I do have one other as well.
okay?
So in addition to the policy that you just looked at, the JGD, JICDR is the due process procedure that accompanies that policy. And we wanted to get this to you again before April. I have hard copies with the track changes. It references the RSA 193.13, which is the law that changed, as well as ED 317.04 verbatim, and then references specifically the statute and the ed rule. So I put it on your Google Drive as well for first reading. And that way we can put this forward for second reading at the next meeting as well. And I have hard copies if anyone would like them.
Okay, so we need a motion for JIDCR to be moved to the board for first reading.
So moved.
Second.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
Thank you.
Any questions about this one? Are there any others?
Okay.
Yes.
Really doesn't have to apply to any single policy, but kind of all the policies in general, reformatting to make it more looking more consecutive or more kind of looking the same as we go through all the different formats, kind of basically having a school heading, having the title of the section, having the names, and actually having the purpose of what the title of the policy it is, who's overseeing who this policy applies to, and then if there's any procedures involved in the policy also, references at the bottom. So kind of you have like responsibilities, you have the scope, has more definitive of what the policy is, because a lot of the policies, when I read through them over the past couple of months, they were more statements, they were very kind of short, kind of to the point, but there wasn't like anything like, who does this apply to? Who's responsible for this policy, was my concern looking at the policies.
So historically, we have always in school districts modeled our policies after NHSBA with, and left them a little on the vague side because the rules change and the laws change so frequently. The processes and who's in charge of them also change frequently. So every time we have a process or a legal change, if we reference, if we add very specific information, we have to go back and we have to change all of them. It's certainly something to consider. And we could actually,
just bring it to the group, so.
we could bring it to the attention of NHSBA even and ask them if there was any, I know Will has been redoing their policies, so I could talk with him and see if he has any interest in perhaps reformatting.
Matt?
The executive board or executive committee of the NHSBA meets on the 25th, I think it is, so I'll bring that up.
That'd be great.
And I wonder if there would be any other districts that do something similar to the type.
So, yeah, when I went through this, so I'm used to policy set up in that format, so there's the different headings and different sections. So I went through a lot of other school policies just to see, was it just my field versus other fields, in the school fields. And like you said, all the schools are very much the same setup. I just felt there's almost too much vagueness for me in the policy. I just kind of like want to see like what was the policy, who did it apply to, and I want to kind of have a little more definitive, maybe not to the laws itself, but to like the group it applies to, what the procedure is for, like for the discipline policy. It actually has it spelled out all the way through it.
I wonder if we could have something, maybe not mess around with our matching the school board associations formatting, but have a explainer piece that went along with each policy. Not, just like you could set up a page that would say the purpose and the scope and the responsibility that wouldn't be actually part of the policy, but would just be a descriptor of the policy.
What it worked was just
That way, the reason for our vagueness could stay there. If laws change, our policy wouldn't necessarily have to change. I don't know.
Question.
Yes, Bob?
Could you maybe bring in an example for the committee to look at, maybe take a couple policies and
I have a few already written up that I
the way you're talking, so we can take a look at it?
yeah, I got a few that I've written up already I can share with the committee board.
I can see this being a really huge process.
It is a process, and I guess my idea of the process would be that we don't go backwards. It's from moving forward toward new policies we go through, we start from there and move our way through the policies that we are at. So if we're in the Cs, we continue from Cs on, hopefully get to the Js, hopefully get down to the last of them. I don't want to go backwards and like revisit As and Bs. I just want to continue on from where we are. Because with the way we're doing it, we should come back around to them afterwards, not just. But it will take, the first round will take a lot of energy just to kind of get everything organized and kind of get it set up into this new formatting system. Once you get the format done, then you just kind of updating, like if there's any new rules, new laws, or anything else comes through.
I would love to see an example of that.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in making work just to make work. It would have to be something that really made it much better. Anyone else have anything?
I'm curious because I was also looking at policy BBBD, and I know that it was a new policy that was adopted in December. Do we, and I'm not on the policy committee, do we normally have our new policies checked over with legal before we have them written, or is it just something that we get from the New Hampshire School Board Association?
I'm sure when the New Hampshire School Board Association put something out, then Legal Eyes have looked at it.
They are.
So we don't have our internal legal look at any new policies that come forward?
It depends on the policy.
I think it would
If
depend.
it's something about, meeting times, it's not something that needs to go through
legal.
Yeah, I think I'm referencing BBBD specifically, removal of school board from office.
I believe that was just a re-lettering.
So that's not a new
It's
policy, it's
it was
just a
re-lettered,
re-lettered everything.
BBBD, I think it was just B, 3 letters last time, and now the letters match the New Hampshire School Board Association's key, if you will, their master list.
So when I look at the policy, it says adopted December 10th, 2020. If it was relabeled, wouldn't it have
We've had a history.
the history on it?
If I could,
Yeah.
it was 2 policies that were lumped together,
That's right.
and so it was recommended, so the language of the policy was already in existence, it was just in a different place. So the recommendation, the legal recommendation from the NHSBA lawyers and their team was that they should be split out because they were 2 separate policies that were grouped into one.
Okay.
And the policy references not just the section 70 of the charter, which I think is what you're referring to, Mr. O'Connor, but it also references the actual statute in RSA. So as we said before, state statute in RSA would trump anything that's written into a charter or a policy. So the legal reference that they cite is in that policy already.
But there was I just think, the only reason why I brought it up is because I think we need to remove the city charter reference. Even though
Yep,
the
the
RSA supersedes
70,
it,
chapter 70.
I think we need to remove it because it's not in play.
Yep.
Anyone have anything else?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.